Wait. Jake. Elise. Seeing Elise and Jake suddenly at my house, I was shocked. It had been 9 years since they had eloped. What could they possibly want now? They barged into the house. Don't just walk in. What do you want? Ignoring my attempt to stop them, Elise, her face twisted in ugliness, shouted.
I'm going back with my husband to his parents' house. You, get out of the house.
I didn't understand what she meant. I was dumbfounded. But the house has been demolished and the lot is empty, you know.
Huh?
Huh?
Both of them stood there, stunned. It can't be helped. I have to tell them the truth, or they might not leave. I started to tell my story. At this, Elise and Jake fell completely silent. My name is Kimberly Norris. I'm turning 38 this year. 10 years ago, at the age of 28, I married Jake, a high school classmate of mine. Jake, who worked at a local home improvement store, was quiet and serious by nature. We clicked because I, too, am not much of a talker. We began living together in an apartment, and I gradually got better at cooking, which I had initially struggled with. We were leading a peaceful everyday life, starting to talk about wanting kids soon. I think I was definitely just an ordinary housewife. I believed that the rest of my life would be ordinary but happy. That's what I thought. That belief was shattered 9 years ago, when I was 29. Jake had run off with Elise, my former best friend, and they disappeared. Their whereabouts are still unknown. Why did this happen? I kept asking myself that over and over again. And the thought that always came to mind was that I shouldn't have gone to that class reunion. If only I hadn't run into Elise again. That was how I felt. Since that day, the gears of our fate had started to turn. Ever since I was young, I had a best friend named Elise. I was reserved, while Elise was flashy and assertive. Though our personalities were opposites, we somehow got along and went to the same public high school. Just like in middle school, Elise and I would walk to and from school together. Then, another person joined us. That was Jake. Jake came from a different middle school, but because we shared the same school bus, we naturally started commuting together. Back then, the three of us would often indulge in idle chatter after school. Hey, what are you going to do after graduation? I'm thinking of getting a job locally.
I'll do the same. Looks like I might get a recommendation.
Many from our high school ended up working in the local town after graduation. But Elise was different.
You guys lack ambition. I'm going to the city to attend a cosmetology school. Then I'll be a makeup artist for celebrities.
Even back then, Elise was highly ambitious. She was fired up about studying beauty seriously and diving into the glamorous world. After graduation, Jake and I started our careers. Elise went on to a cosmetology school and then got a job at a hair and makeup salon. Around this time, when Elise would visit home, we often hung out together.
What? You two are dating?
Sorry, I should have told you sooner. I felt somewhat embarrassed and looked down. Jake's workplace was near mine, and sometimes after work, we'd go out to eat together. That's how things gradually progressed between us.
No, it's rather late, actually. I was worried when you two would finally get together. So, marriage next.
What about you, Elise?
Jake, his face turning red, ribbed Elise. Elise brightly said,
I'm still scoping out the right guy. The mixer the other night was so much fun. There were heirs to big companies, pilots, lawyers, you name it. I'm having a hard time deciding who to choose.
Elise seemed to be leading a flashy life, heading out every night. It was an exciting and fun story, but in retrospect, it felt like a fairy tale from a distant world. And now, 10 years have passed since we graduated high school. Jake and I are in our 10th year of working. Both our careers were going well, and soon the topic of marriage came up. Jake's parents were very kind and they adored me.
Jake is an only child, you know. It's like I'm getting a daughter if he marries you. Kimberly, I'm really happy about that.
Erica, my mother-in-law, would say with a smile that I still remember vividly. As a result, I naturally became closer to Jake's family, and I found myself spending less and less time playing with Elise. It couldn't be helped. Elise was living a glamorous life in the city, and I was about to start a family. Our life rhythms were just too different. It was a bit lonely, but drifting apart was unavoidable. Then what I thought. That's what I was thinking when I received an email about our high school reunion. Maybe I'd get to see Elise after a long time. Jake and I were looking forward to reconnecting with our old classmates. Finally, the day of the reunion arrived. It was held in a hotel banquet hall. As I reminisced about our high school days, I felt a bit giddy, and then Elise appeared. Elise was dressed more glamorously than before, looking much more mature. But there was something off about her expression. She seemed too flashy, somehow. Though she had always been assertive, she used to be approachable too. But now, that had vanished, and she seemed to exude an aura that was almost intimidating. I was a bit uneasy, but when we greeted each other, Elise immediately smiled. While enjoying the buffet, we caught up on each other's lives.
So, you two are finally getting married. Congratulations. It's been a long time coming.
Thank you. How have you been doing, Elise?
Me, I'm doing great, both in love and work.
Listening to Elise's story, it seems she is dating a successful entrepreneur who owns several businesses. Their romance started when she did his makeup at the salon where she works. Elise spoke animatedly about her glamorous city life. I felt somewhat overwhelmed, more so than before. It was great to see my best friend again, and it seemed like both of our lives were going well. Normally, this would make me happy. Yet, I felt uneasy. The fog in my heart did not clear up easily. After that, we started hanging out with Elise again as a trio. Elise had been busy with work, but as things settled down, she began contacting us more frequently. Soon, however, I started feeling uneasy. Elise's makeup became heavier over time. And the places we ate at changed from regular diners to dimly lit bars. Next to the bar was a dance floor, where loud, flashy music blared. There were plenty of flashy men and women dressed in provocative, scanty outfits. Feeling uncomfortable, I hesitantly approached Elise. Hey, I appreciate the introduction, but could we maybe go somewhere a bit more peaceful?
What? That's so boring, Kimberly. You're such a kid.
As I hesitated, Elise began to look down on me with a clear disdain.
Come on, Jake. Let's dance.
Ignoring me, Elise pulled Jake onto the dance floor.
I'm embarrassed.
Despite his words, Jake was dragged along and started dancing. It was so clumsy that it was embarrassing to watch. But Jake was different from me. He seemed to have a desire to try glamorous things that we couldn't do back home. Watching Jake dance enthusiastically, I couldn't help feeling somewhat upset. After that, I started to decline Elise's invitations. I felt like we were living in different worlds. But Elise kept inviting me persistently.
How long are you going to be such a goody two-shoes? That kind of life is boring. Kimberly, you're so uptight. You're not very charming as a person. You need to let loose.
Her mocking remarks increased. Because of this, I became even less inclined to join Elise's outings. First off, I was already busy with work and family life. I couldn't just hang out all the time like Elise. Surely Jake wouldn't neglect his work and family just to dive into that lifestyle. That's what I thought, but Jake has been going to the city every weekend to hang out with Elise. Lately you've been coming home late, haven't you? You're also gone on the weekends. Did Elise invite you again?
Sorry.
He would apologize, but he seemed nonchalant about it. I sighed. I've kept quiet because Elise is a friend and I trusted you, but we're married now. Hanging out with other women. I'm not really okay with that. To which Jake casually replied.
What are you talking about? It's not just Elise. Recently, her boyfriend has been joining us.
Elise's boyfriend? The businessman you mentioned?
Yeah. He's a bit older than us, but he's really cool and sophisticated. I totally admire him.
Oh, really? I had seen a photo of Elise's boyfriend on her phone before. He's a burly man with a beard, the intimidating type. He's not someone you'd typically find in our social circles. I felt a bit relieved that it wasn't just the two of them, but it didn't change the fact that Jake was still going out. Just because there's someone else doesn't mean it's okay for you to go out. I take the time to make dinner, and if you don't eat it soon, I can't clean up.
What's the big deal? You should come too, Kimberly. Let's all have fun together.
Jake said with a smile, but I felt uneasy. Typically, Jake is shy and, like me, on the quieter side. He was never one for flashy entertainment. Something was off. But I gathered my courage and firmly said, "That's not the point. I'm not going, and I wish you'd stop getting so caught up in it too." Despite my words, Jake's behavior didn't improve. If anything, his spending seemed to have gotten more reckless.
Kimberly, I'm out of money. Can you lend me some?
What? You just got paid. What are you spending it on?
For happiness, you know?
He said, smiling cheerfully. Come to think of it, even his dress sense has changed completely recently. He started wearing flashy leather jackets with embroidery and styling his hair with wax more often. He used to be indifferent to fashion. Now, he's starting to resemble Elise's boyfriend. I felt uncomfortable. Maybe it was because I sensed that Jake was drifting into a world unknown to me. Time passed while I harbored these unsettled feelings. But I couldn't just let things be. Even I, usually so reserved, must speak up this time. Resolved, I picked up the phone to call Elise. Hello, Elise?
Kimberly, what's up?
I'm going to get straight to the point. I want you to stop leading my husband astray. Elise chuckled upon hearing this.
Leading astray? That sounds so sinister. We're just having fun together. You should join us, Kimberly.
No thanks, I'll pass. We have our own lives. We can't just play around forever. Elise responded with heightened enthusiasm, almost singing.
What are you talking about? Let's break free from that boring life and have fun.
What? What are you talking about? This is getting nowhere. Just stop inviting Jake, okay? After hanging up, I felt uneasy about Elise's behavior. Jake too has been acting strangely high-spirited lately. One moment he was all smiles, the next he started getting angry. He seemed emotionally unstable. He was often distracted, and his mumbling to himself has become more frequent. I found myself getting angry alone more often, and it's becoming exhausting. Then, suddenly, the day came. Jake didn't come home all night. I stayed up all night waiting for him, but even when morning came, he still hadn't returned. This had never happened before. Something must have happened. I called him repeatedly, but couldn't get through. Since he had been seeing Elise frequently lately, I thought maybe he was with her, and so, I called Elise's cell phone. But there was no connection. That's when it happened. I received an email on my phone.
Sorry, Kimberly. I've come to like the cheerful Elise more than being with you, always sullen at home. Every day is fun with Elise. I can't stand living with you anymore. The divorce papers are in my desk drawer, please file them. Goodbye.
As soon as I read the message, my mind went blank. What is this? Words just slipped out of my mouth. My mind was in turmoil, and I could barely stand. What does this mean? I want to talk this through. Even though I sent emails back, there was no reply. Finally, it was noon. I contacted Jake's office. He had been at work until the previous day, but they said he hadn't shown up. I reported his absence and explained the situation to Jake's boss. Please let me know if you find out anything. After I said that, I hung up the phone. I then called his parents. Both were shocked when I explained the situation and said he wasn't with them either.
Stay calm, Kimberly. I'm sure he'll come back soon.
Erica said gently, but I was panicking completely. Knowing it might be futile, I tried calling Elisa's cell phone again. But, of course, there was no callback. That's when an idea suddenly hit me. Elisa's parents lived in the next town over, if I remembered correctly. I pulled out an old address book and called their home. However, Elisa's parents also said, "We haven't been able to contact our daughter recently." I was nearly losing my mind. I immediately went to the police station. I showed them the email and explained everything in detail. But the police officer's response was sluggish.
Is it a case of elopement?
Hearing that word again made me dizzy. Please, start searching right away. In a near frenzy, I pleaded. The officer spoke to me in a calming tone.
Well, if they were minors, it'd be one thing, but they are both adults, right? If there's no sign of foul play, it falls under the category of voluntary disappearance. I'm sorry, but it's difficult to launch a major investigation. However, we will register it in the police database, and if they are spotted, we will contact you.
Is that so? Please, do what you can. With that, I dragged my tired body back home. It was already getting dark. Just a few months ago, we were living peacefully. Why did this have to happen? Thinking back, I knew Jake and Elise were hanging out, but I fully believed him when he said her boyfriend was also with them. Could that have been a lie? A pretext for infidelity? Shocked, I stood still in the living room. Jake's belongings, which he had been using until the day before, were still there. I just couldn't believe he had disappeared from my life. Where did you go? As I muttered to myself, tears rolled down my cheek. 9 years have passed since then. For a while after that, I waited for Jake to come back. But, after 6 months had passed. Persuaded by my parents, I submitted the divorce papers that had been kept in my desk drawer. We concluded that he wasn't coming back. Jake, of course, had been fired from his job. Since the elopement incident, I had started to fall ill more often, becoming increasingly absent from work. I think the stress had been building up without me realizing it. During this time, my in-laws were the ones who helped me.
I'm truly sorry about what our Jake has done.
They apologized repeatedly, and despite their own pain, they took great care of me. Thanks to my in-laws' compassion, I was able to recover. I continued to maintain a relationship with them. And then, they asked me for a favor. Now, my health has significantly improved. I've returned to work and am back to my regular routine. It was on one of those days. Despite it being an early holiday morning, the sound of knocking on the front door echoed loudly. It seemed too early for a delivery. Half asleep, I went to the door, only to find an unbelievable sight. Wait. Jake. Elise. I froze upon seeing the two of them.
Kimberly, why are you here? Isn't this Jake's parents' house?
Elise and Jake looked puzzled. 9 years had passed, but there they were, the two who were supposed to have eloped and disappeared. Their eyes were bloodshot and unnaturally bright. Moreover, they were wearing clothes as ragged as old rags, and there seemed to be a smell coming from them. Could it be that they haven't taken a bath? What kind of life had they been living? What do you mean, why am I here? That's my line. Where have you been all this time? What are you doing here? Confused, I yelled out.
Well, there were some complications. Oh, and thanks to you smoothly signing the divorce papers, I could marry Jake right away. Thanks.
What? I couldn't believe how casually Elise spoke. After disappearing with someone else's husband, her demeanor was far too light.
By the way, where's Mom and Dad? Where did they go?
Jake and Elise barged into the house. Hey, don't just walk in. Ignoring my attempt to stop them, Jake loudly called for my in-laws. But no matter how much they looked, it was futile. They aren't here.
Where are they? And why are you at my parents' house? Where's Mom and Dad?
Both of their eyes were fixated in an unnatural way. I was momentarily taken aback by their bizarre demeanor, but I gathered my courage and managed to speak. Before that, can you explain why you have returned now, after all this time? At my words, Elise twisted her face into an ugly sneer and yelled,
I'm moving back with my husband to his parents' house. You, get out.
I was dumbfounded. But the house has been demolished and the lot is empty, you know.
Huh?
Huh?
There was a palpable sense of confusion between us.
The lot? My parents' house is right here, isn't it?
Yes, let's have a serious talk.
I was fed up, but it seemed like they wouldn't leave without hearing the truth. Reluctantly, I began to speak. After they had eloped, my in-laws had bought a second-hand property in a remote rural village and moved there. They had always said that after retiring, they wanted to retreat to the countryside. There, they lived quietly, tending to a vegetable garden. So, if we are talking about where my in-laws lived, that rural house might be more rightly called Jake's parents' home now. My in-laws, concerned about my health, would often send me vegetables. I also called them frequently, maintaining our relationship, albeit modestly. However, those days did not last long. Years later, something happened on one particular day. A tragic accident occurred on a rural road where a car, driven recklessly, veered onto the sidewalk. Unfortunately, my in-laws were the victims. They were hit by the car on their way back from shopping. Though they survived, both sustained serious injuries. Didn't you hear about it last year? A young person, high on illegal drugs, was driving recklessly. Perhaps it was my imagination, but both seemed to pale and fell silent upon hearing this. At that time, it was hard to believe such a dangerous incident could happen in the countryside where my in-laws lived. However, it turned out that a festival attracting young people was held in a remote area. It appears that illegal drugs were being circulated there. A young person who attended a festival took drugs and drove while still high. It seems an accident occurred as a result. Subsequently, due to their injuries worsening, my in-laws found it difficult to continue living in the countryside. Since the insurance money from the accident had been paid out, they decided it might be better to move into a facility. Hearing this, I thought of my in-laws, who had no one else but Jake. They had always been concerned about me. Even after Jake disappeared, they were incredibly supportive. After much deliberation, I finally made up my mind. I began visiting the facility frequently, taking care of them on behalf of Jake. The fact that the apartment I previously lived in was near the facility also pushed me to act. My in-laws were very grateful to me. Jake was a late child for them, and they were older than my own parents. Unable to move themselves, they asked me to handle the disposal of their country house, among other things. They reasoned, it's unlikely we'll return from the facility now. As I took care of various matters, my in-laws apologized to me repeatedly.
We're really sorry, always.
Since Jake disappeared, you've been a great help, Kimberly. We're so grateful, but we feel terrible for disrupting your life. We can't apologize enough.
Please, don't worry about it. I would respond each time. However, my in-laws couldn't accept that. Considering everything, including the care I was providing on top of Jake's disappearance, they felt they couldn't face me properly. Eventually, they began to talk about transferring the house they used to live in to me.
We've disposed of the country house, but we've kept the old house as it is. I always felt like Jake might come back. I couldn't bring myself to sell it.
Erica said this with a lonely look, appearing much older than usual. They think of me as their daughter, so they want to entrust me with this house, they told me. Of course, they added that I could sell it if I didn't want it. I hesitated, but being put in this position, I couldn't refuse.
It's the least we can do to make it up to you, Kimberly.
I was already considering moving out of the apartment where Jake and I had lived, so I agreed to take over the house. I did some minor remodeling, and that's where I live now. After I finished telling them, both of them fell silent.
I can't believe it. Mom and Dad.
Jake looked especially pale and visibly shaken. Perhaps he was remembering his parents. From his previously intense gaze, there seemed to be a slight return to sanity. In contrast, Elise started yelling loudly.
That's not what we agreed on, Jake. I thought we were going to hide out at Erica and Ken's place.
At Elise's words, I frowned. Hide out? What do you mean? Now it's your turn to explain. But Elise just turned away dismissively. As usual, it was impossible to have a proper conversation. Instead, Jake, reluctantly, began to speak. From here, the truth behind their elopement started to unfold. The boyfriend Elise had boasted about at the reunion 9 years ago. His identity was shocking. His name was Andy. Though he claimed to be a businessman, it was a complete lie. Andy was involved with antisocial forces, dealing in illegal drugs as his business. Initially, Elise too had been deceived by Andy's claim of being a businessman. But by the time she learned the truth, Elise had already been completely enamored with him. She quit her job at the beauty salon and decided to start a business with Andy. They called it a business, but in reality, it was selling drugs in the underworld, a completely illegal operation. Initially, the money flowed well, and it seemed like a lucrative job. They indulged in branded clothes and gourmet food. Elise was living the glamorous city life she had always dreamed of. Gradually, Elise and Andy wanted to sell drugs to more people. That's when they targeted our high school reunion. We, being from a small town and rather naive, were seen as easy targets. However, I began to feel uneasy and distanced myself from Elise. Then, they shifted their focus to Jake. Andy came along and got on good terms with Jake, who then fell into the urban nightlife. Soon, Jake was approached with the drug business and quickly got involved. Like Elise, he started dealing on a small scale. However, they eventually struggled to sell their stock. To cover the unsold drugs, they bought them themselves, gradually accruing debt. That's why Jake mentioned having no money back then. Jake and Elise discussed their situation with Andy.
There's a place where you can earn more.
Andy then began to elaborate. It was an isolated island where plants used for illegal drugs were cultivated. A final destination for dealers who couldn't sell their drugs. It was not a job opportunity but rather a dumping ground for failed dealers. Deceived, the two were forced to cultivate illegal plants there. Gradually, the criminal organization grew larger. People in similar circumstances were continually sent to the island. Of course, the existence of this criminal organization could not be made public. As a cover, under Andy's direction, the email saying, "Elise and I have decided to elope," was sent to me. I was completely deceived by it. Even if I went to the police, they would dismiss it as just an elopement, never reaching the organization cultivating illegal plants. They had planned it that meticulously. On that island, there were a few villagers who had been living there long before. To avoid suspicion, Jake and his group had to pretend to be couples who had moved from the mainland. That's why they claimed to have gotten married. This was also under Andy's instruction. That's why Elise referred to Jake as her husband. As soon as this topic came up, Elise raised her voice angrily.
I only married Jake for convenience. I only truly love Andy.
But I later learned that there were many women like that on that isolated island. Elise was just one of the women Andy was keeping around. Deceived by Andy, Elise and Jake ended up marrying as a cover and reluctantly started working there. 9 years passed, and recently rumors spread on the island. There were rumors that the place where illegal plants were being cultivated might be raided by the police. Jake said with a pained expression.
Maybe. Remember the car rampage that you mentioned earlier that hurt Mom and Dad? The illegal drugs the driver had taken might have been made from the plants we were growing. That might have triggered the investigation that's reaching the island now.
What? The organization's members, fearing arrest, scattered in all directions. Elise and others came here hoping Jake's parents would hide them, which is why they visited this place. I was speechless, never expecting such a truth. The room fell silent for a while. But Elise, inappropriate to the somber atmosphere, raised her voice loudly.
Hey, hide us, Kimberly. This house is yours now, right? Then it should be easy. Come on, do it. Otherwise, we'll get arrested by the police. Let bygones be bygones.
What? What are you saying? After you took Jake away, and now a drug cultivation crime too. How can I hide criminals like you? Enough is enough. I'm so fed up with you. Angrily, I confronted her, and Elise grimaced.
Come on, don't be so stingy.
With that, she spread her arms out towards me.
Then we're going to skip the country, so give us some money.
What?
Andy's planning to flee overseas too. We'll all meet up there. This time, we're all going to enjoy living abroad. Isn't that super happy?
By this point, it was all beyond my comprehension. Surely, what these two were involved in wasn't limited to just dealing and growing. They must have been using the drugs themselves. Their tattered clothes, unwashed bodies, and vacant expressions. They didn't look normal from any angle. Suddenly, I was terrified. Of course, I couldn't hide them, nor could I give them any money. But, especially with Elise, communication was completely impossible. Considering they were drug addicts, I had to handle the situation carefully.
Come on, hurry up and give us the money. We're going to have a vacation in the tropics.
Elise then began to make a scene, yelling loudly. Exhausted from talking, Jake just slumped down, staring blankly at one spot. All right. Seeing their condition, I sighed. But I don't have any cash on hand, I'll have to withdraw it from the bank. Can you wait a bit?
Yay, that's our Kimberly. You really get it. We're like best friends, aren't we?
Elise's words almost made me nauseous. I took my smartphone, wallet, and house keys and stepped outside. After making sure the front door was securely closed, I hid in the shadows and called the police on my phone. Hello, police? Please come quickly. Drug addicts have entered my house. The address is. Within 5 minutes, the police arrived. The two were first arrested for breaking and entering. As they were taken to the police station, Jake still seemed lethargic, barely managing to walk. In contrast, Elise continued to scream in high spirits.
Kimberly, where did you go? Kimberly, we're best friends, right? Hurry up and give me the money.
Elise's loud, nonsensical shouting was unbearable to watch. Does she even realize that she's being taken away by the police? Given the situation, it seemed unlikely they would be coming out anytime soon. Watching the figures of Elise, who was once my best friend, and Jake, my former husband, I felt a profound sadness. Later at the police station, both were tested for drugs. The results were unequivocally positive. They faced charges for breaking and entering, illegal drug use, and manufacturing and selling drugs. They were sentenced to 9 years in prison. That's the same amount of time that had passed since their disappearance. But it wasn't just Elise and Jake who were arrested. One by one, other members of the organization were also caught. That includes Andy, Elise's boyfriend. He was about to flee the country but was apprehended by police at the airport. It turns out Andy was indeed part of an antisocial force and the mastermind behind this operation. He skillfully sold drugs, manipulated people, and brought them to the isolated island. They were forced to work in deplorable conditions, cultivating illegal plants. Once on the island, since nearly all their money was taken, escape became impossible. Their smartphones were confiscated too. That completely cut off any contact with the outside world. It was a cunning setup. The drugs that had recently become popular among the youth seemed to have originated mostly from plants cultivated there. Although the police had trouble catching anyone initially, the investigation progressed due to the accident involving my in-laws. Furthermore, the statements from Elise and Jake, which I had reported, helped gather a significant amount of information. However, by then, Elise was barely coherent. She was continually crying and yelling, making communication difficult. Jake seemed somewhat more coherent. Occasionally, he would even speak words of remorse through tears. There's no doubt he was regretting everything now. But it was too late. Elise was deceived by a shady man from the city and fell into a life of crime. Jake, too, was easily duped by Elise and Andy. They were both dazzled by the allure of a glamorous life and lost sight of themselves, a pitiful end to their story. It's true, at some point, everyone might dream of such a glittering existence. I can understand that sentiment. However, such a life always has its shadows. They were swallowed by those shadows, never to return. Now, I live a peaceful life. I work daily, watch movies on weekends, and lead a very ordinary life. I still visit the facility where my in-laws reside frequently. I've requested the staff to ensure they don't show any TV news or newspapers to them, especially not about their son. The return of their only son might have been a joyful event, but his immediate arrest must have been a shock. Moreover, they would not want to believe that the illegal drugs he cultivated indirectly caused the accident they were involved in. Today is a rare day for a walk in the facility's garden. I push the wheelchair slowly. My in-laws smile joyfully. And though this is all I can do, I hope for peaceful days ahead. I push the wheelchair more firmly, filled with this wish.